work in isolation if they are to benefit from the trade, commerce and its evolution, especially the benefit from digital trade. In recent times, there are efforts to take our country in the direction of several free trade agreements, because we are only talking about the fact that people are wanting to leave the country. But if you want to look at scenarios where we want people back to the country, we have to look at digital trade, digital commerce, digital economy as a pillar for the growth. And that's where public sector officials like you all also have to play a role in supporting that endeavor, because we can always be talking about what we did wrong and not what we did right, and our children leave and we are left alone. So in that context, there are lots of things we have done right in the past, especially in terms of legal policy measures to support digitization in the country based on international standards. So to benefit from digital economy, as well as to address the challenges, are always relying on global standards. And I'll come to one or two examples of scenarios which we have adopted that will benefit even the government sector adopt digitization. So some areas, the international level in the form of a UN international instrument or another form of international instrument agreed to by countries, like-minded countries who have come together to formulate certain principles to facilitate international standards. So in the area of UN taking a lead, the only area they have so far been successful is in the area of digital trade and commerce through a body of the first point I have made about addressing challenges, dealing with cyber security, cyber. The UN is ad hoc committee discussing who have worked together to create a framework to deal with the problem of the crime and enable countries to gather electronic evidence from multiple sources, provided basic human rights, rule of law measures are in place domestically. There are courts and independent review is possible. And the instrument is called the Budapest Cybercrime Convention. I think Lakmal might dare me to be some this because I was supposed to give a very high level overview and you won't have time to read it. But I just want to flag that for future consideration. And interestingly, Sri Lanka is part of that. We are the first South Asian country to become part of the Budapest Cybercrime Convention, and the CID Cybercrime Investigation Unit Division, which is now a Cybercrime Investigation Division of the CID, and digital forensic activity connected with, including social media investigation unit, were all established as part of our efforts under the Budapest Cybercrime Convention. Privacy data protection, although some UN such as ICCPR, International Convention on Political Rights, and some other instruments refer to that, it refer to privacy in various places. There is no common framework yet giving comprehensive cover how to address challenges and how to manage issues connected with privacy. So often countries have to draw reference to two standards available. One is the APAC privacy framework, and then we have the OECD privacy guidelines, on which both APAC privacy framework and the European Union General Data Protection Regulations were built. Those are very advanced standards. We can't afford to reach that level yet, but we have amalgamated both into one hybrid model, and the recent Data Protection Act, which I'm going to talk about, is a reflection of a convergence of two international standards in this area. Cyber security, again a challenging area because the global division internationally in the UN with regard to what might be a very international diplomatic topic now. But a country wanting to adopt cyber security legislation to manage, mitigate issues often would need to look at a standard. And in our work at Sri Lanka CERT, in developing a cyber security legislation, many laws, many of us were inspired by what was done by OECD and the NIST. So those standard reference instruments were looked at, and our international cooperation on cyber security, and Sri Lanka CERT is at the forefront in building legislative framework on cyber security, which is still being finalized. But on top of all those categories, there is something new that has come up. Because countries have taken different positions in this area, in the area of social behavior, in the area of different forms of content being posted online, including terrorism, violent extremist content online, it has been difficult to reach consensus by countries. So countries have worked with private sector, not in isolation. They have worked with private sector globally to develop standards. And these are in international law. And the most important one in that list is the Christchurch call, a collective set of actions to eliminate violent extremist content online, which was developed under the leadership of the late New Zealand Prime Minister and the present President of France, working in collaboration together with Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, and lots of other social media companies. Sri Lanka entered that along with South Korea of September 2019. Right? Christchurch call, it actually happened after a tragedy. You may remember an incident in the mosque in Christchurch where a person who went and did that attack was live streaming content real time, and it was uploaded to a number of social media channels. Although domestically it was taken down, the concept of viral distribution, which means that the content that was posted by others outside and other persons based on those went on further post them, meant that it went viral globally, and all of the ones which were spreading took a long time to take down from the internet. So these are challenges, and in the context of the recent online safety law that was controversial, we find it difficult to fix it in any of these boxes, and it's good news that the government folks who did it wrong admitted error and now trying to fix the problem. So in our Sri Lankan landscape, we have many digital laws. Okay. Starting with the Intellectual Property Act modernization based on an international standard. I will not go into the details of how software is protected, but in the government space, if you look at the e-government policy of 2009 or 2010, and the circulars based on the e-government policy. There is a separate chapter dealing with intellectual property founded on the principles of the Intellectual Property Act in relation to the IT service and in relation to procurement of software. You might like to look at the options available as described in the e-government policy. If you can't if you cannot find it anymore, please contact Sri Lanka CERT and Kanishka. Kanishka was one of the key people in the good old days who helped us in the changes to the document as well. So you can get it. There's a lot of other laws connected with electronic digital banking. It has come to a point where you and I can transfer money, and I think in the public sector you get your salaries via slips. How is slips happening? Sri Lanka Interbank Payment System. Under the Payment and Settlement Systems Act number 28 of 2005, which enables slips and check imaging truncation system. And in the present day, T+0 real-time clearance. And there was an evidence amendment done at that time to make that evidence from it acceptable. And to facilitate a lot of other electronic transactions, the Electronic Transactions Act number 19 of 2006 is an important tool for you to look at, and I have put in red here the international reference document, which I will come to in a minute, that we adopted to harmonize it in line with global standards. There are lots of other laws that have come in, including the Computer Crimes Act and the Budapest Cybercrime Convention along with it, and the Data Protection Act, which was a more recent development. Of course, cybersecurity law is still pending. If I am to go quickly, in the interest of time, for digital trade, digital commerce, this is the gold standard, the UN instrument governing this subject area, on which consensus has been reached by countries. Facilitates electronic commerce, electronic trade, and digital government activity. But apart from that, it facilitates cross-border commerce, digital trade. And one important feature is item 4 here. Apart from recognizing electronic signatures, digital signatures, and equivalent of writing in electronic media, it allows for automated messaging systems to enter into contracts without human intervention based on certain default principles based on the UN instrument. So Sri Lanka adopted this standard long years ago, and we ratified this standard on the 7th of July 2015. Sri Lanka amended our law, the Electronic Transactions Act, to Act number 25 of 2017. Electronic ගනුදෙනු නීතිය අහලා තියෙනවද? කියලා. ඒකට අවශ්‍ය කුලාසිත ආවේ මේ 50 යට. හරි. නීති කරුණා කරලා බලන්න ඒ ගමන ඊග්‍රාම නිලධාරී ප්‍රොජෙක්ට් එකට අවශ්‍ය කුලාසිත Electronic Transactions Act එකෙන් තමයි ආවේ. So basically our international standards on that area is basically facilitated through this instrument, and we were the first in South Asia again to adopt the standard, and now Sri Lanka is used as a global reference point for this area. Finally, on data protection. I won't have time to go into all of the aspects of data protection, but basically to point out that this is the primary legal privacy instrument that was brought in and was built on a number of international legal standards we looked at. But in drafting this law, a lot of consultations took place between stakeholders, including with government officers. Now remember, since you are in the IT service, all of you have to keep in mind that in all this technology adoption or even manual paper related to data you are collecting, in relation to processing of personal data, this law provides the regulatory framework applicable to government and private sector in the same way. And since you are from the IT service, keep in mind the issues that can arise in processing personal data. So this law is about regulating processing of personal data, and it allows for citizens and other data subjects, individuals, to exercise certain rights, but subject to certain limitations. It also establishes a new regulatory authority, but we have to keep in mind why this law was done. It was done not to go on a major regulatory overdrive, but it was done with the objective of ensuring that Sri Lanka can use that as an instrument to facilitate growth, innovation in the digital economy, while looking after the rights of individuals, not only Sri Lankans, but those who are visiting the country, who are working on a work permit, those who are coming here as tourists, are equally protected in the law. This law is going to come into operation from the 18th of March 2025. On the 8th of January this year, there was a gazette issued giving the time frames for implementation. So the internal operation aspects was put in place on the 1st of December 2023, and the Act is supposed to come into operation on 18th March 2025. But I would like to emphasize that at this moment in time, the new regulator is still being established, and they are in the process of hiring staff, and there are challenges with regard to the types, categories of staff, etc., that is being worked out. But here are some important definitions. What is personal data? All personal identifiers, online, your identity, your email, your identity card number, your address. I know a lot of your departments are collecting this information. Even at the point of entry into the premises, right, where you give the identity cards, they are writing down in a logbook, right? Whether the data is collected in manual form or digitally in future, they are careless about it. They are generally not a privacy. South Asians, especially privacy conscious people, we like to talk everything other than ourselves. We like to talk about what other people do. So in that kind of situation, implementing a privacy regime is going to be a complex long-term journey, but it's a baby step in the direction of creating trust. So I just want to emphasize why the law was done. To protect personal data which is defined. Who is protected? Somebody called a data subject, which is a natural person, alive or deceased, to whom that personal data relates. And the law is applicable to somebody called a controller or a processor. We have done, during the time the law was being done, we did workshops for immigration, motor traffic department, going back to 2019, we did several workshops for identity card department, registrar generals, but I don't know how many of you were there. We did a workshop, a detailed workshop for pensions department as well. But I think it was done at the head of the department and operational level by some of the key administrative officers, but maybe the IT service was not present. You might have to look at this law carefully. A controller can be a government entity, a private sector entity that collects personal data or gathers personal data, personal identifiers of individuals, and decides how you are going to process it. A processor is an entity that is hired by a controller or a third-party provider to support your activity. We look at immigration, ID card department to border traffic, you all have hired third-party companies to manage internal processes digitally. Keep in mind, this law applies to manual, digital records equally. And processing is very wide, including transmission, archival, and cloud hosting. Everything comes under the definition of processing. And finally, here is a kind of map of areas where the law will apply. So I have indicated Department of Registration of Persons, which issues ID cards. They collect large amounts of individual birth to address to parental and other details. They are a controller, which will be regulated by this act. Then schools which collect, right, our children's data and our parental records. Hospital will be regulated by this. A supermarket chain to which you have maybe having a loyalty program, right? All these entities, including telcos, banks collect our data to open a bank account. They will be regulated by this. That's why Central Bank, Insurance Board, SEC and others are working with the new regulator to develop common standards. And then we have a framework for cloud hosting. So let me give you an example. You look at the Grama Niladhari service, right? They are the first point of contact for our city, our people. They have to go with the details to get the identity card if you are not doing it from the school, or renewal of an ID card or whatever. They have the entire electoral register. Grama Seva Niladhari service is under the Home Affairs Ministry. So Home Affairs Ministry is the controller here, and all of the Grama Niladharis in future will be processors under this act. Because they are a party supporting Home Affairs Ministry to do that entire function. So there's a lot of work currently happening, mapping the scenarios. It's a long journey. We have just started the journey, and we were the first in South Asia. India has now come up with their own law, similar, but it has differences as well. So these are the broad areas covered. I'm not going to go into details today in the interest of time. I think I'm almost, time is up. But even posting data on the cloud, this law provides answers. The lawful processing framework, there is number of options. But when it comes to biometric data and fingerprint health records, there is a very high standard for lawful processing of such data. We'll come to that if required. Citizens or individuals who want to exercise their right to know what information you government entities have about them. They have the right, they can exercise their right. They have the right to withdraw processing, right to object. But then these are all rights which are not unilateral. The government entities or private entities can refuse to exercise those rights on a number of grounds, including, let's say under the Right to Information Act, you need to retain records for 10, 12 years, right? Then there are other laws like the banking, central bank governance requirement, our anti-money laundering laws, and measures like that require certain amounts of data to be retained and analyzed by the regulator. So there are grounds for refusal on that basis. Every government entity will have to have a data protection officer, right? So the information officer currently in place may become that officer, right? And then of course, I will not go into cross-border data flows or cloud hosting here, but when it comes to government entities processing data, there is a limited localization option, but it does not exclude government entities from categorizing data sets that can be cloud hosted. It is possible to be done. The law allows government entities to categorize classified data for cloud hosting in collaboration with, in consultation with the Future Data Protection Authority. Private sector, government corporations, government banks have complete freedom to host data in cloud services, right? And there are a number of options with regard to how this can be done. The sweeping powers of the regulator is very wide. It takes care of all aspects of digitization where individual rights are impacted, but this law was done with the objective of creating digital trust, or trust in a digital transformation era. So it's a long journey, just don't worry too much about it. All of us are learning as we go, right? Directives and penalties quite high, 10 million maximum. But remember, before hitting directives, the regulator is required by law to conduct inquiries and give directions to violating parties to get back on track, to do course corrections. So that is allowed under the new act. And of course, if you have done internal housekeeping, as put down in the last slide, last para here, there are lots of areas you can mitigate liability. If you have processed it properly, if you have addressed the grievance of the complainant properly, if you have done internal basic housekeeping to maintain your records securely, and if you have what is called an in-house data protection management program, right? I think SLEDA will be conducting more detailed programs on this in months to come. Look out for those programs, and I hope you will take part in them actively. So with that note, Lamkmal, thank you. I've taken about 40 minutes. Sorry about it, and thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Like your busy schedule, you are here. So we have, let's focus about 45 minutes of panel. So we have to let Mr. Jansen go out sharply around 12:15. So let's give you a reminder on what I was suggesting. So basically, this panel is moderated by Niranjan Disanayake, who is Chief Executive Officer of Just In Time Group, and our panelists consist of Mr. Jayantha Fernando, who just concluded, who is a digital law specialist and the pioneering fact for Sri Lankan IT e-governance laws. At the same time, we have Mr. Andrew Shade, who is an economic officer for US Embassy Sri Lanka. At the same time, your keynote speaker Shamatha Agawatha, who is the Chief Information Security Officer, LankaPay. So I would like to hand over the session to Niranjan to take the things forward. Niranjan, you have about 45 years is doing in the government sector, so you can raise questions to Andrew. I believe he will enlighten us as much as he possible. So thank you very much. Niranjan, over to you.
Thanks, Atma. Dr. Jayant spoke about the legislations and the regulatory aspects and various acts that have been introduced and that are to be introduced in future as well. But I think as government officers, when you are trying to adhere to those legislations, so you need to follow certain best practices, right? And so you need to safeguard public interest and also, so these legal legislations are very complex. So, Jayanta, according to your experience, so what are the best practices government entities can follow when they are to implement these new legal legislations? I mean, how can they navigate these challenges?
Yeah, thanks. So I think I explained in my very brief presentation the fact that the adopted laws are based on international standards. But applying those laws in practice in government or private sector entities, all of our countries, most of our countries fall behind. It's a common phenomenon not only here but in